Hi, everybody. Welcome to this lunchtime event in honor of October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's my honor to be here with you, and I'd like to just share a snapshot of this stage of a 50-year movement to end violence against women and children. Thank you to the Learning Network for taking an interest in this topic, and I appreciate that very much. I'd like to just begin quickly. Why does this matter? Um, we know that 1 in 3 women globally have been coerced into sex, abused, physically beaten during their lifetime. At least one woman, hmm, always hard to say. You'd think after 50 years I would get used to this and being a member of the DVDRC committee, but every time I see it, it gets me. At least one woman is murdered by her partner every week in Canada, every 12 days in Ontario. We have upwards of 500,000 children are exposed to domestic violence every day of their little lives, and it's growing. Um, and we know the cost to many of our systems, at least $4 billion. Not to speak of the differential impact on women. Um, we can't go into all of that, but you know that there is that. So I'm going to just give you a snapshot of the different decades. And there will be slides in your handouts related to the actual thesis findings, FYI. So in the 70s, believe it or not, we had no shelters. The first shelters were Andayan House in 1968, Interval House in 1973. Just think, women worked from the grassroots. There was no funding, no homes, no recognition of our work. That's how we began our work. I started in 72. I know some of you online may have started earlier and some later. During the 80s, some of you will remember this comic, not funny at all, but Wife Abuse is Not a Laughing Matter. It was in the Toronto Star. It was after Margaret Mitchell, an NDP member from BC, uh, tabled the 1 in 10, the famous 1 in 10 report that Linda MacLeod did for the status of women. She presented it to Parliament, and the reaction was, "Ha ha, George, ha ha, Tom, do you beat your wife?" Uh, that moment ignited a national movement, a spark that fueled women's activism across Canada, and the Ontario government responded. Wife Assault is a Crime campaign was 1983, and believe me, I was there. We never for a moment thought that that was the solution, the criminal justice system. However, it was our window of opportunity to get onto the federal platform, and we jumped at it. There are lots of issues with mandatory reporting, and I think now a think tank needs to be brought together for us to reconsider that because we realize it's had lots of unanticipated consequences for women, particularly Indigenous women and women of color. Shelters received more funding during that period of growth. Um, MCSS at that time invested in training across the province. Some of you will remember the manual Understanding Wife Assault that I was commissioned to write back in 1985 lacked an intersectional perspective. I wasn't there at that point in my own development as an activist. Hopefully, I'm much better now as we all grow together. Um, Many initiatives were launched during that period of time. We had the year of government. Feminists led the way in creating change, policy, writing, um, developing curriculum, training materials, training programs. We produced excellent research during those days. We had the ear of government, and some of us were figs in my sample. And I did not know what a fig was. It's feminists in government. Um, However, 1995 changed everything. That phase one, when we were building the movement, there was tremendous growth. There was beginnings of funding. We were leading the way as feminists. And then 1995, you will remember, it was a slash and burn period. That was the Mike Harris government. And I will say honestly that we're still in recovery from that period of time. You might remember that in October of that year, welfare checks were cut by 20.6% as the first intervention after that government got installed, and it went downhill from there. One of my participants said, so I think as a movement, we ended up in an abusive relationship with our funder. The man who had the money said, if you need a place to stay, you need it to put up with this condition. The funding was definitely used to say, shut up, you want this money, just shut up. Uh, We're still actually, we've had some friendly governments since then. Governments do matter. However, we're now facing another hostile government in the province. Canceled the gender-based violence roundtable, refused to call, still does, violence against women as an epidemic, which of course it is. The bottom line is that governments, I think, matter. And a future political action for many of us is we need more feminists who share our views on this issue and many others that affect the status of women um, to run for office and to take over Parliament. Okay, let me go. Um, a living story of courage and change. In my thesis work, why did I focus on activists? And I will just basically say they're a piece of living history, which may help the rest of us understand where we've come from, where we might want to go, and how we might get there. They're usually very threatening to the status quo. Um, and as a result, many people are deprived of knowing who the activists are. Often our work is invisible and behind the scenes, but believe me, it's always active. Whoops, wrong one. Okay, here we go. These are my beautiful participants, brilliant, wise, funny, wonderful, wild women, disruptors, truth tellers. You'll recognize some of them, change makers, a very diverse group, um, very seasoned activists. They had to have started in the first two decades, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they 3 decades, and they had to still have been working in our movement by the time I interviewed them in 2018. We embody many identities. One thing that united us was our passion in politics to end violence against women and children. And if I add it up, and I'm probably low on this, at least 900 years of lived experience and wisdom. And when I say lived, I don't mean predominantly as survivors, but lived as activists as well. Of course, some of us are survivors, not all. When we think of 1 in 3 women, it's your sister, it's your mother, it's your aunt, it's your niece, it might be yourself, might be your neighbor, might be your friend. Okay, we I would say shifted a dominant narrative from victim to abuser. Uh, if instead of asking why doesn't she leave, we should be asking the question, what is it about him that makes him do this? And how does he stop? Why doesn't he just stop? One of the quotes was, I think the success of the violence against women movement is the research, the evidence, and the documentation that's been produced that speaks to the presence of violence in women's lives. The success is that we have made this issue visible. Not our only success, but a major success. Remember, it was in the dark, it was silent prior to the early 70s. And a very, very brief story. This is Sweet Luke, um, murdered on his first unsupervised visit. His mom had worked hard, Kate, to not have this happen. Um, the courts did not rule in her favor. The good news about Sweet Luke's life is that he's had a major impact on our province and actually the country. That community developed Luke's Place. I would urge you all to go to their website. You'll hear much more about the story. But they've transformed a tragedy into a victory, as many communities across this province and country have done. And what is the tipping point in combating violence against women globally? This was a study of 70 countries. I found it very heartening. And what they found is that what makes the most difference is when activists, feminist activists, come together and they create a strong, autonomous movement. That is primarily what makes change. And so I leave you with the question, are we a movement or are we merely a social service sector? I'm a social worker. I take seriously service. I do trauma counseling. I work with people directly as part of my practice. I also do the activism. Let me just see. I want to just find my place here. Um, but I think the reason I've survived and many I've worked with have survived this work is that we have to do a variety of things. Each one of us holds a part. Every one of you do a piece, hold a piece of the puzzle, but we need to think of the whole. We need to think of the movement lens, the whole movement. Our work is to dismantle these silos. No matter where we come from, we need to be champions in each of these areas: research, health, legal, neighbors, families, and friends, public education, sheltering, educational work. We have to hold a movement lens going forward. That is, in fact, was one of the most pressing themes that came out of my research, is that we've in the necessary stage of having to build service and now having to run service, which is complex, often not enough funding, under-resourced. All of our energy gets put into that, and that cannot be enough. It is my dream to have 10, ideally 20% of every worker's job description to do political action, to learn the history of the movement, to know where they've come from, know whose shoulders they're building their work on, and also to get out of their office. You cannot hear one disclosure after another and not go into that valley of despair, which I mean as rage without hope. So I think to save ourselves, and self-care and collective care is critical, or else the movement implodes. We have to get out of our offices and do this political work. It's creating that political will that's going to end violence against women and kids. And we know that if there is a will, we will find the way to do it. We have the answers. We need the support to do it, and we need a groundswell of people from across the country to support us. I think the torch is alive. We carry our story forward. If we act together, listen across silos, try to break the silos down, collaborate and honor survivor and activist leadership and wisdom, then we will continue to make a difference. Um, I'm thinking of social movements in a 100-year cycle. Remember, Ellen Pence once said that. We are 50 years in to a 100-year cycle. It not moving fast enough. I will be gone before we get to that 100-year cycle. I'm 74, but my children and my grandchildren will see it, and so will yours. So take hope. We're making a difference. Every day we make a difference. We're saving lives all the time by believing women and supporting them in their work, and children, and the work we do with men as well to make change in their lives. So I thank you for being part of this with me. And if you have ideas about what we need to do to keep the movement lens alive, please jot me a note. My email is right here, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. And thanks for sharing your lunch hour with me. Bye-bye.